Hello and welcome to the Intel Brief. Today is Monday, the 13th of July. I'm your host Daniel, and today we're going to talk about sirens have been heard in Bahrain as Iran has escalated the conflict as US conducted more strikes in Iran. Allies are beginning to muster air defense aid for Ukraine as the battlefield momentum has shifted, and gas queues are growing as Ukraine targets the Russian fuel supply. So firstly, the United States carried out a fresh round of strikes on Iranian targets, and Tehran answered with a new missile and drone attack across the region. Air raid sirens were heard in Bahrain, home of the US Navy's Fifth Fleet, as Iran's retaliation reached the Gulf states, hosting American forces. The exchange pushes the war back beyond Iranian and Israeli territory and into the Gulf itself. So what? To me, it seems highly likely that we're just heading back into the conflict rather than any ceasefire or peace deal. I think it's likely that Bahrain, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia will try and publicly distance themselves from US operations to try and avoid being targeted themselves. But Iran has made it clear that, they don't really care and that they look to, hurt the hosts themselves as well by targeting especially fuel infrastructure. And in my opinion, I think the US lacks a lot of options here. The US public and governmental system has made it pretty clear that they don't want to go back to war with Iran, which, leaves Trump and the US negotiation team in a pretty sticky position as they can't really threaten Iran with much more. In my opinion, this is a bit of a bad move. I get why they're doing it, but I also think that you should let the negotiating team at least try and threaten them in the meantime before the war ends. Because Iran's made it clear, they want to control the Strait of Hormuz. That would be a massive win. It's a huge amount of money. And next, Ukraine's Western allies have pledged additional air defense systems and interceptor stockpiles as the battlefield momentum shifts. The commitments come as Russia keeps up heavy missile and drone barrages against Ukrainian cities and infrastructure. The push signals renewed coordination amongst NATO members after months of uneven support. So what? It's likely that this will blunten Russia's air campaign, but the interceptors alone won't change the situation on the ground. I think this is highly likely a political move to signal that the West isn't as fatigued as Moscow had hoped and that they're going to continue to support Ukraine. But there is a big complication here, and that is the Iran war. As we just talked about, it doesn't look like that's going to end anytime soon, so allies are going to be wary of splitting up their air defense stocks between the two theaters. This is particularly relevant for the US, who, made it clear that they're going to send air defense missiles to the Middle East rather than to Ukraine, which is kind of fair enough. It is defending their own infrastructure and their own troops rather than Ukrainians. But also, on the other hand, Ukraine has come in and provided support to these GCC countries and how to defend against drone attacks in particular. And lastly, fuel queues are growing across Russia as Ukraine drone strikes on refineries and depots deep inside Russian territory continues. The campaign has cut refining capacity and forced rationing in several regions. Ukraine is systematically targeting the fuel supply that feeds both Russia's war machine and its domestic economy. So what? It's highly likely that this is the most visible homefront cost of the war for ordinary Russians so far, and it is clearly having an effect. There's already multiple videos online of Russians getting into fights over fuel, and the videos of fuel lines are massive. It's likely it's going to strain Russian logistics even further as Russian military fuel gets priority over civilian supply. As you can imagine, this is just going to cause more issues and upset more people, especially people in Moscow and St. Petersburg, as it affects them. But I think it is unlikely to break the Kremlin altogether. The sustained shortages will erode the narrative that the war is going well, but it's not going to stop them. But anyway, that's been the Intel Brief. I've been your host, Daniel, and I'll see you again tomorrow. See you!